and I am an assistant teaching professor here at the University of Colorado Boulder in the Department of Cinema Studies and Moving Image Arts. My focus in filmmaking is narrative long form, so narrative feature films. I completed my first narrative feature in 2017 entitled Moving Parts. And that was a film and a story that I developed and produced in Trinidad and Tobago, where I lived for 10 years and worked as the creative director of the Trinidad and Tobago Film Festival. That film is the story of a Chinese woman named Zen Zen who migrates to the island to be with her brother, who's working construction. He gets her a job at a Chinese restaurant, which she soon discovers is a front for a brothel. So that is a fictional film, but based on observations that I made while living in Trinidad. Port of Spain is the capital, and they have natural gas and oil there. So it's this very urban Caribbean place that is 9 miles off the coast of Venezuela. So there's a lot of human and other trafficking that goes on there. It's also English speaking and has a wonderful carnival, so it's not all dark. But that's that film, and it is available through our distributor IndiePix on Amazon. So, and now I'm working on my second narrative feature. I just completed a short proof of concept. It's entitled Silt, and it's the story of a Navajo botanist who, the feature is a story of her descending the Grand Canyon, the Colorado River through Grand Canyon on a scientific exploration she's put together on a river trip with a group of developers, prospectors who are looking into building a dam on the Little Colorado River. This is also actually happening. There are some developers from Phoenix who are proposing a dam on the Little Colorado, which is the major tributary to the Colorado River. But this is a narrative fiction story. So I've made a short proof of concept that is her backstory, which will be premiering at the end of this month at the Independent Film Festival of Boston. So, yeah, so that's me.
All right, hello everybody. In thinking about the topic of the female gaze, I actually kept coming against something that was hard for me to get around. And as a filmmaker, yes, I'm a female, but I'm also a Black female. And these intersections of my identity really influence the films that I make. And I'm delighted by that, actually. I'm happy that I can break stereotypes. I'm happy that I can really show an authentic view of Black culture or culture of other people of color. And because a lot of times what you see in films that are made with a gaze that's not from a Black female, you see those stereotypes, and sometimes you see Black people acting in these white roles as well, and you don't get that authenticity of experience. And then there's also seeing devastating circumstances for people of color and African Americans or whatnot. You see that again through what is called a white gaze, okay? And I didn't know how to talk about being a female filmmaker without also including the fact that I'm Black. And to be honest, I got into this industry in order to make a change and to really uplift people of color and to show real representation that isn't what somebody expects or thinks that they're gonna see or what they should see. You know, it's actually real, authentic, multidimensional, to show the dynamic range of individuals. So, my most recent film, This Is Not Who We Are, it could be argued that this film was made entirely from the Black gaze, and the Black female gaze. So my film is about a town that has been called the happiest city in America, and that's Boulder. That's this place right here. The problem with that label is that Boulder has a lot of the same problems as every other place. And that includes racism and the microaggressions and police harassment and all of that of people of color. We have those problems, but that's not what's always on the headlines and splashed on the news when you hear about Boulder and think about Boulder. And so what I did was I talked to Black residents about their experience. What's it like to live here, okay? And with that, you could really argue that my film is, it's about the Black gaze and whatnot. I don't want to go over my time here because I know I have 5 minutes. But I am okay with my, my identity really driving this because I had a goal in mind. And my goal was to educate people so that they can see all the sides of Boulder so that we can hopefully have a change and really make this that happiest city and a lot more inclusive than it really is. So, so yeah, that's what I think of when I think of this topic.
Yeah. Awesome. So I'm a lady Gabby, she, her. I focus on documentaries. I've worked on a couple of narrative projects, but my whole life is documentary world. That's what I do for 10 years. That's my living, breathing existence. Do we know what the male gaze is? Show of hands. Have you heard of this? Do we know what academic paper that's from or who coined the term? No. Laura Mulvey, 1973. Okay. So, in the second wave feminism in 1973, Laura Mulvey, very influential film critic, basically writes an academic paper that talks about the male gaze, which is female characters in films are only being viewed by the male director's perspective. The males in the film, this is, basically the gist of the academic paper, have agency and they have a goal and they have objectives and they are active. And the women in the film are passive. They serve the male character's objectives in the story. They are sexualized. They are there as eye candy. We don't see close-up slow motion images of men's butts in movies. We see slow motion close-ups of women, right? Now, she also argues that we've been conditioned as viewers since the beginning to adopt the male gaze as our own, and we don't question, even if we are women, non-binary, etc. We are just accepting the fact that we are watching movies through a white male lens traditionally. And as soon as we're not, that's when everybody goes, oh, well, that's a woman film, or that's a chick flick, or whatever. And we don't accept that as real filmmaking, okay? So thank you, Laura Mulvey, for crystallizing this so that we can then talk about female gaze, but I still have one problem with this. And my problem with this concept is that you're still articulating that this one director of a hierarchical system is the person through which the eyes of the audience is happening. And in reality, what I observe with filmmaking is that it is so much a collaboration from so many different people. If you're doing your job right, so many different diverse people, that to say that the gaze is of one person alone is like counterintuitive to a collaborative art form, in my opinion, and it kind of feeds into like the problem that I have with film theory so often, is which that they constantly write about it as if every decision is made by the director, when the reality of filmmaking is that thousands of decisions are being made by very talented people under the director that the director may not even be aware of that are happening. And so I say this because I think, even though I'm not an academic person or professor or whatever, like I feel like I have to honor my like film theory teachers from college or whatever who would be like, how can you do a topic on the female gaze without talking about the male gaze and blah, blah, blah. So we've done that, we can move on. And I think what you said is so important, which is like, let's not just, like, let's also realize that we're now in 2022 and like, does the female gaze include the non-binary gaze, and et cetera, and like, let's not be so specifically gendered, and let's acknowledge intersectionality. And let's also acknowledge, you know, for me, being a woman who is part Brazilian, part first generation immigrant, part WASP American background, like, I don't know, there's so many complicated factors of that, and my gaze does, as an artist or as a filmmaker, does not just come out on like the way the camera is framed on screen. It comes out in the way my people are being taken care of, and the way that I structure my projects, and the way that I go about getting funding, and things that I am and am not willing to do. And it just goes so far beyond just what you're seeing on screen. So I want to talk about like that entire experience of being something other than a white male director in 2022. Mm-hmm. Sorry, it's sweaty.
I'll just keep that.
I would like to give both of you the chance to respond to her, because I think what she said was very important. I saw you, kind of shaking your head in agreement, Katrina. So both of you, I think, would have a good perspective in responding to Elena.
Yeah, so it seems like we're all three on the same page. I have a note right here, Laura Mulvey, Visual Pleasure and Narrative Cinema, an important article that addressed this issue of the experience of the person who's making the film, that you can't actually separate the filmmaker from the content. And for me, this idea of the female gaze is really a holistic approach. The independent film world is very different than the Hollywood film world. This is a statistic from the Hollywood, from Women in Film. In 1998, there were 4% of female cinematographers were women, and in 2021, 6% of cinematographers are female. So, sorry, 4% of cinematographers were female in 1998, and now we're at 6%. So the amount of images that we're seeing that are being authored by female or by women is such a small percentage, and this idea that the female gaze is not just how we frame bodies on a big screen, but how we tell stories. So another important book is The Carrier Bag Theory of Fiction by Ursula Le Guin, who wrote about, in response to the hero's journey and looking at the possibility of female storytelling outside of the three-act structure in which a character is called on a journey, and conflict and obstacles are being presented to that hero throughout the film, and then they're changed. So even this idea of conflict, it's so embedded in our storytelling. There is actually a new documentary out right now by Nina Menkes, who is a really incredible avant-garde experimental filmmaker, and it's called 120 Years of the Male Gaze on Our Backs. So it's Nina Menkes on brainwashed, sex, power, and the camera. So she started to do this presentation talking about the female gaze, and in turn turned it into a documentary that I think was at Sundance, and your film was at Sundance, wasn't it? Was it? No, Tribeca, okay, that's right. One other idea that I was thinking about when thinking about the female gaze is the Bechdel test, which basically says that there's, you pass the Bechdel test if there are at least two women in the film who talk to each other about something besides a man. And who have names. Now, to sort of reiterate what my colleagues here have both already said, I think this term, the female gaze, is outdated. And there's a new super fabulous podcast that I just found today. It's called You Must Remember This. It's Karina Longworth, and she's talking about the history of the erotic thriller, about the rating system, about the X ratings and the introduction of pornography as an art form, what was happening in the 80s, how it's changed now, kind of the horrible situation with Bertolucci's film The Last Tango in Paris, where basically the actress Maria Schneider was put in a very uncomfortable and abusive situation in order for Bertolucci to get the best performance from her. So, and it really kind of ruined her psychologically and ruined her career. Now we have intimacy coordinators. So there's like, the times have changed, and this whole idea of the female gaze is also about, you know, who's in front of the camera, who's behind the camera, how is the story being told. But again, this idea of the female gaze, it feels outdated, and it feels like it's focused on this sort of white, male, heteronormative, middle class experience, and it doesn't take into account the non-white, the non-heteronormative, and the non-capitalist gaze as well. So looking at capitalism as a component of this type of storytelling. So actually, Karina, and you must remember this, I hope you make a note of that, because it's a really fabulous podcast. She called it the contemporary gaze. So this shift to, you know, something that's more inclusive, but also I think it's important for us to remember the history around representation and around what it has been and what it continues to mean to be a woman in film.
I really just want to hear from the audience. I mean, I said my intro, so, you know, any questions that they may have. I mean, I guess the other note that I'd make when I just have my female filmmaker lens on is you got to think about what the female gaze is not. And I gave a very good definition of, you know, what the male gaze is. And the female gaze, it's not the opposite of that. It's not like we're going to, you know, look at these body parts of men and looking at these certain camera angles. It's not really that. But the best I can describe it is it's by feeling. Okay, it's a lot more of characters, finding the humanity in the characters, really. Just really quick, okay. I grew up in the 80s. I was a kid that grew up in the 80s, and I had big brothers. I played Transformers with my brothers. And so many years later, and I watched the cartoons on Saturday morning and everything, and many years later, when the Transformers film came out, I went and saw it with my now husband, and we were so excited, and this was something that we could connect on, you know, that reminded us of our childhoods, and yeah, we're going to see this, and guess what, you know, what's going to happen now that they can add all these special effects, and oh man. Yeah, we watched Transformers, and all I saw was like Megan Fox's body parts, and a lot of gratuitous machinery. You know, somehow the cartoons were able to make these Transformer machines feel almost human, you know, as characters, and I really identified with them as heroes, and I liked them as a little girl. But watching this film, it crushed me, you know, because this was the only representation of a female going on, you know, and that really kind of ruined me and in Hollywood films, to be honest. I can't really say how many Hollywood films I run to see. They absolutely did, yeah. Yeah. Exactly, and I've never seen another one. And so everything was just shattered for me. And I had a long discussion with my husband about, you know, do you realize what was happening there and why I'm so turned off of this this male gaze? This movie wasn't made for me. There was nothing in this film for me to identify with. You know, that little girl that used to look at these guys as heroes too. So when I think of the male gaze, that movie is at the top of my head with it. But the female gaze, I would not say is the opposite of that at all. So that's really what I have to say on that.
Have people had that experience of like being totally let down by like realizing that there's not a single character that you can identify with in the movie?
Especially for older.
Yeah. Yeah. It sucks. Yeah.
So a couple of questions have come in here, and I think they maybe somewhat based on some of the stats that you threw out there. This is coming from a student. Why do you think it's so hard for women to break into the film industry? And I'm going to ask kind of a subpart to that, because I went to a session today about the future of the film industry. And because of the changes in technology and distribution and viewership, let's face it, we don't, as viewers, don't go to the theater as much as we sit home and watch on our devices or on our TV. So the question would be, do you feel like it's easier now to get into film as a woman? And if so, or if not, what do you feel like the barriers are, the gatekeepers?
Well, so I've worked on the last two films with Nancy Schreiber. She's 72 now. She was the fourth woman to be inducted into the American Society of Cinematographers. She won the President's Award there a couple of years ago, and she still struggles to find work. And one conversation that we've had, and I've also been a part of this organization that I belong to called Film Fatales, is that the film industry, it's a business, and you can see across the board in America that we're often giving power, especially when it comes to handling large sums of money, to men. And so in the independent film world, I think you'll find, I don't know the exact statistics, but I think you'll find that it's much closer to being equal in terms of the number of female directors to male directors. But as soon as you jump into Hollywood, it's actually over COVID, it went down the number of female directors working on budgets over $20 million. So the industry still feels more comfortable putting larger budgets into the hands of men. And it also falls to, it is the responsibility of women who succeed to bolster other women up. Because what happens is this culture of mentorship, or, Steven Spielberg seeing himself in a younger man that he meets at Sundance who's made one small independent film, and then he's got some big budget film in Hollywood, and that doesn't happen as often with women.
I am going to say that as a Black woman, I don't see very many of these at all out there, especially in Colorado. And I feel a lot of reason in Colorado, that's a big thing to talk about. But what it is, I feel, is a representation that we don't always see any reflections of ourselves in these roles. And again, I'm speaking as a Black woman, okay? When I was interested in entering into this field, my parents were both medical professionals, and at first they were horrified because it wasn't a real job to them. And secondly, it was, but there are no other Black women doing that right now. It's going to be really hard. And don't get mad at my parents. They were trying to protect me and inform me, and let me be aware of this reality. Do you know what you're trying to go up against, So I will definitely say there is this lack of representation, and also this lack of mentorship, where you have other people who have done this before you to lift you up and elevate you as well. Especially around here, it's been difficult. So I'm going to say that's one of the barriers.
I think, yes, to everything you guys said. I think there's also things that make women quit, all left and right. This industry is ruthless, and it is so hard. And when you, I've had experiences where I'm the only woman on the crew, there are no female subjects, and I'm on the road for 16 days straight, and I haven't spoken to a woman in 16 days. Like that's like a real thing that has happened. And that's isolating, right? And there's not necessarily like support when, you know, you're on the road with a bunch of guys and they want to go to a strip club after filming, and that's like the networking event, and you're the only one who's like, I don't want to do that. So now you missed that networking event, and you're now seen as like, you know, oh, she's not cool or whatever, you know. And so, and then in addition to that, like in documentary, the number of women that I see going out into the field after they've had kids is like 0, and the number of men that I see go out into the field after they've had kids is like all of them. Like there's no question of like where are your kids and who's with them. Like it's not even a question. And when women who have kids want to go out into the field, like if you're pregnant, you are taking on medical risks by going out into the field as a pregnant person. You may not have access to a bathroom for 6 hours because we're running around and there's no bathroom for you and there's no bathroom break. Like these are everyday things that just over time accumulate and make people burn out. And that's like the few people that are brave enough to even try, like yourself, like thank goodness, you know, might face barriers that men just don't face because they can go to the bathroom like in the woods right back, you know, and it's just like not the same. So I think it's both. It's like getting in and then it's staying in.
That motherhood part, that's huge. You know, I definitely felt that I had to make a choice in my career. Like, am I going to be at home raising my 2 kids, or am I going to be out? And quite honestly, for several years, that's what I did. I stayed home and hung out with my kids. And then, it was the beginning of 2020, and I was like, yeah, they're both going to be in school full time, and I have some time for myself now to really focus on my career. No, that didn't happen that way, you know, but definitely I'm figuring it out. But it is quite the challenge because then, you know, you have COVID, and it's not only I'm working on my feature documentary and I have my own production business, but now I have my kids at home and I am their teacher as well, keeping my house together. So it's all of those different things, all those weights, those things we're expected to do. And a lot of times it's like this. Sometimes it's just too hard, and people feel like they have to make a decision. Unless you're crazy like me and feel like you can do it all. So yeah.
I'd like to ask one.
I'm a mother too.
Oh, okay, do you want to answer that
No,
question?
just wanted to say that.
I'd like to ask a question that's a little different than the female gaze, but when I think of females and what they're good at, I've always thought women are good listeners.
Mm.
And in the prior session, Elena, it was about getting to the truth in art. And what she said was, you, as a documentary filmmaker, you must show up as a listener. She creates a setting where they can get to the truth. So I'd like to understand from your perspectives, and then we've got several student questions that I want to ask too. So maybe if you don't feel compelled to answer every question, don't feel like you have to. What does a woman bring to the table as a filmmaker that maybe a man doesn't? Is listening one of them, and or what are other components or skills that a woman can bring naturally to making films?
I think that women definitely think of taking care of their subjects and the people in their film. Not to say that men do not, but you know, ultimately it's in the portrayal of that documentary or film that comes through that will speak to that. But I definitely feel like there's that piece. So besides being a filmmaker, I am also a concert video director. So if you've ever heard of a little venue called Red Rocks Amphitheater, I'm the director of videography there. And you know, it was interesting before I had the position and just kind of observing the position. You know, I'm the only Black person on the crew, of course, only Black female director. And a lot of the times it's like the crew is very quick to, where we do audience shots, let's find a sexy girl, scantily clad, you know? And it's so great as a director. I'm like, I don't even want to see that. There's time and a place, but it's like, I don't want to only see that. Let's show more people in the audience. Okay, let's be a lot more inclusive. And I feel like that's a lot how women are. We're very interested in being more inclusive with everybody and showing everyone, not just the sexy girl. But how about this gentleman down here in front rocking in his wheelchair? Come on, that's a story right there, okay? So definitely pointing that gaze to where I want it to, and that might sound like what, but to me, it's a big deal. It's a big deal when there's an artist on stage and he has two dancers. There's one black and one white. And I can say, and everybody wants to naturally point to the white dancer, which happens all the time. I can say, hey, how about that girl over there with the blue boots? Okay, let's film some of her. I feel so empowered that I get to do that. And I get to have people kind of switch their view and show people this is also beautiful.
I think what we bring to the table is ourselves, and we bring exactly what you're talking about. This is what I'm interested in. Like, I'm not going to generalize it for all women, but when you have diverse people telling stories, and that includes racial diversity, gender, socioeconomic, sexual orientation, every single thing, you will get different stories that are refreshing, and we will have less experiences where you audience members won't be raising your hand being like, I felt so left out of that movie. You know, it was really disappointing that I couldn't see myself on screen represented ever. Like, the more different types of people that we have in positions of directorship, the less we're gonna have that feeling. So like, why would we not all want that? I don't know, you know, that's what we want. We want to see ourselves on screen so that we can resonate with these stories and not accept that we just have to only resonate from like a white male perspective. Like, that's such a like crap consolation prize for what we could be having, you know? Yeah.
Okay, we're done. I do want to get that one quickly, which is that, and this is maybe coming from a slightly different angle, but that some of my favorite female or filmmakers right now are women, and I think that one of the things that they are bringing to the table is this experimentation, and there's room in a way, maybe because there have been less of us to present ideas in a different way. So like Claire Denis, who's a wonderful French filmmaker, obviously Jane Campion, Power of the Dog, Chloe Zhao, who actually the writer was one of my favorite films more than Nomadland, Andrea Arnold. There's just these women who are working in slow cinema and who are exploring relationships in a different way, violence in a different way, power in a different way. And in some ways, I think that experimentation is really what we're bringing. So, thank you.
I'm going to ask a stupid question and then also add that there was another question that was similar. One student asked, what films would you recommend that show a non-binary gaze? And then there's another one that says, what are some recent films or shows you would recommend that have meaningful portrayals of women, queer, BIPOC communities?
Does anybody have a non-binary?
I have no idea if this fits, and I'm, you're probably expecting a different answer from me, but Hedwig and the Angry Inch.
Interesting.
Yeah. With that, oh my god, good soundtrack. Yeah, it's a wild movie, right? Pretty weird, but it was good too as well. Boy, why do you say interesting? That's what I want to know.
It didn't come to mind.
Yeah.
You know, like,
Yeah.
It didn't come to mind. Like, the first thing that came to mind was like a blank wall.
Yeah, well, I mean, as a straight woman, I loved seeing this character, and that this character was female, the character was male. I guess all I really had was the movie title, but that's the film. I was hoping maybe someone else could elaborate on that. Have you seen that film?
No, I've heard it.
Oh my goodness.
Hedwig and the Angry Inch.
Oh, it's actually.
Although I did just
Did everyone hear the name of the film?
I just thought of a film with a non-binary gaze because it's also a trans gaze, which is Disclosure, documentary from
Documentary, I believe 2019, maybe 2020. Disclosure. The entire crew was trans and non-binary. It's an incredible documentary. Highly, highly, highly recommend. I believe it's on Netflix still. Yeah.
I mean, that's such a complicated question. For some reason, Pariah came to mind, Dee Reese's first film. I don't know if he was thinking non-binary, but it's a story of a it's a coming of age story about a young girl who identifies as a lesbian, and it's really a beautiful sort of self-referential film about the Black community, and it internalizes the conversation around homophobia and homosexuality within the Black community, and it's a beautiful film. And then I just finished watching Mayor of Easttown, so I thought that in terms of the female, seeing how Kate Winslet is represented, and also how she's sort of demanded that her body not be airbrushed, and just this really real experience, or what felt like a real experience. So.
Well, that brings up another question from a student, which is often strong women in film are given male characteristics. How do we move past this to have strong feminine women characters in movies?
Sorry, I do want to go back to the other question really quick, because I didn't get to speak to Black female characters and whatnot. Issa Rae, as a producer director, I love her so much. I cried watching Insecure because I had never seen Black female characters that just had so much dimension, and it was just, she was so multifaceted. She talked in the mirror about her successes and about her failures. She was awkward. She didn't fit any normal stereotype of the sapphire that has all the sass, or anything like that, or this really downtrodden person. I just loved it because it broke so many stereotypes, and I finally felt like I saw somewhat of a reflection of myself, and even the men that she writes, they're not stereotypical Black men, you really get into how they, the trials and tribulations they have with work and with their relationships, and again, it's not in this real downtrodden way. I'm just really happy with that, and I want to see a lot more Black female filmmakers, and just filmmakers in general. It can be anybody. Just get outside of those stereotypes, okay? So, okay. And I'm so sorry. I took away from your question the other, but did you?
Male characteristics.
Yeah, the question was that often women are given male characteristics. How do we move past this to have strong feminine women characters in movies?
What's really interesting though, I have an 8-year-old and a 10-year-old, okay? So we have Encanto on at our house 24/7. And so I think of Luisa and all the stories that come out about her. And she's a strong woman, and she looks physically strong. And that honestly turned out to be a positive. And especially in the world of Disney movies, do you know that Disney was anticipating little girls to be really interested in Isabella, the long-haired girl that grows lots of flowers and whatnot. But it's been selling off the shelves like crazy. Sorry, I've got Luisa's character. This physically strong, brawny woman, and because a lot of people are relating to her, a lot of young girls are relating to her and saying that reminds me of certain characteristics I have, which has been fabulous. So that's actually a way that I think is quite okay, and it's been empowering for a lot of people. And I really hope that Disney kind of breaks this this thing where they feel like it has to be this beautiful princess, you know, which, and again, I'm in this kid world, you know, I did watch Frozen 1,000 times. To see that ending when it was like true love's kiss, or true love, whatever, and it was her sister, oh my gosh, I got goosebumps, you know, because we need a lot more of that. Okay, to show young girls that it's not to aspire to be this long-haired, you know, whatever, like Isabella, or to find that prince to love you. No, that's not the most authentic love out there. So I feel like I'm all over the place, but this is all really, really important to me. So yeah.
I love Encanto, and
Yeah.
Louisa, part of what makes her so relatable is that she's not only like strong, but she also has to carry the burden of being strong. And she has to carry the burden of making sure that she's the strong one for her family and for all the people around her. And like, that is something that women can relate to so hardcore, because we are constantly feeling like we have to rise to a strength that is like so high level. and so to see her like embody that, that's I think what made it so powerful.
Here's a question about the finances. Would more female funders at the grassroots micro budget level create an entry-level pathway for female directors?
Yes. Let's get that started. I mean, we had a producer who was living here for a while, Danielle Renfew here in Boulder. She had a fund, Superlative Films. Now she's working with Superlative Animal. So a comedian, SNL comedian. Anyways, she's working for a big production company in LA now, but she had a film fund that she started here out of Boulder, $25,000 towards a production company, and then they were specifically funding films that more female-driven content or female-directed content. And I think there's so much wealth in Boulder, and you know, we have this tech industry, and it would really make so much sense to have a film fund. I mean, even just here at the university, I have colleagues who are making independent films for $500,000 or less. This is narrative work, you know, paying actors, paying crew, post-production, distribution, and I think it could be a real hallmark for Boulder. Am I pitching this? How do you do you want to get on board? So, or let's, you know, spread the news, spread the word. Let's have a meeting.
Yeah.
Anyone else? Okay. I've got specific questions for Katrina and Elena. Elena, could you please say more about how you approach each step of filmmaking funding? Pre-production, production, post-production.
How much time do we have? Okay, I will make one distinction. For me personally, taking on financial risk was not something that I was willing to do. So beginning after college, I basically am work for hire in my producing and directing. I'm very fortunate that I was given opportunities to be paid for my work. The sacrifices that I make is that I don't own the finished product, and I never will see royalties. And if the film that I make is a huge success, that won't matter to me. So I'm not the best person to talk about funding, because I kind of decided that was not an aspect of filmmaking that I wanted to dive into when I started my career, and maybe that will change. But I also think it's important to be honest that not every single filmmaker needs to deal with funding. And I respect the crap out of people that do, because it's so hard and overwhelming to me, and I'm just in awe of people that do that. So normally when something comes to me, there's a basic topic and there is like a basic green light of funding from somewhere. And then the process is research, pre-interviews, talk to as many people as humanly possible, listen forever, rinse, repeat, listen more, keep going. And then the only way that I can describe it is like, from that moment until the end, there will be more revisions of every single second of that film than you could ever possibly imagine. Like 48 versions of a 2-minute scene, hundreds and hundreds of hours that no one will ever see, collaboration to the brink of exhaustion, people leaving and coming during the process, like utter chaos from start to finish with some kind of resiliency that gets you to the end. I don't know how else to describe it. Well, I just started working. I started as an intern. Yeah, it's a great question. I started as an intern at a production company where they already had projects being greenlit and coming in the door. Got really lucky with a few breaks and a few people believing in me, and like one person in particular who was a graduate of my same college and like 2 years older than me, and it was a woman, and an opportunity came up to be a story associate producer, which I had never heard of, but it's like basically who they hire when they can't afford a story producer, which is somebody who helps the editor decide like which of the hundreds of hours go in the final product, because it's like way too big of a burden to put on an editor by themselves. And she, on the phone, without having had much experience with me at all, they asked her, "Is Elena good at story?" And she was like, yeah, sure, Elena's good at story. Of course she's good at story. And like that changed the course of the rest of it. And then I had a few breaks where literally my boss was incompetent and I did their job and people noticed after the fact, and that's like, that just kept happening. I just kept having incompetent people above me and like outworking them and outcreating, and eventually made people see that I was just as capable of doing that. And like, I'm so lucky and so privileged that that happened, and I know it doesn't happen for everybody, and it's not a path that will always work, but it did in this case.
Well, I have had my own video production business just for years, like 14 years, you know, so I own all my gear. I know how to video edit. I know people that have those skills and resources as well, you know. So living in Boulder for 22 years, this film has been just bubbling up inside me for a while. And then when it was like, I'm gonna make this film, all these things just came together for it to happen, you know. And again, a lot of my experience and the fact that I have my own gear and we didn't have to hire out for a lot of things was really good. There are some scenes with me in it as well, because in a lot of ways this film was about my gaze and my perceptions. So yeah, we had to hire a videographer for that, but that was helpful. Now, as far as the financing goes, we did really well on that front. We applied for a lot of grants, and because and we got pretty much every grant that we applied for, and I think a lot of it, thank you, has to do with that there was such a need. There's such a need for this content here, and for as long as Boulder has been around, nobody has ever made any type of film about you know, the Black population here at all, you know. So it was about time. So we did really well with the grants, and the community came out to crowdfund this. So many people, which has been really amazing. What has been interesting to me is that, you know, after we go through the process of the sound sweetening at the studio and the color correction and all of that stuff, get the film out. The film's actually doing well. I didn't really talk about that part. Our world premiere is at the Boulder International Film Festival last month. We won the People's Choice Award at that, okay? And I found out last weekend that we won the LA Film Award for Best Documentary Feature and Best Picture, okay? So what this tells me is that this is actually resonating, all right, with other people, because there's other people who want others to know what their situation is and to be aware in their other cities. So anyway, so in droves, the community came out to support, and it's everybody who had. So crowdfunding was huge, but now with outreach, it's coming up again, and this is where it's like we're going to have to try to do another push. And I feel like because the film's come out and it's done pretty well, that we might have a good chance of getting a little bit more funding to really help us to get our outreach out and to get this into more places. So that answer.
Congratulations.
Thank you. It's unbelievable.
I can believe it.
Okay, we have another student question here. And any of you can answer if you have international experience particularly. How would you compare women in films and filmmaking within the U.S. versus internationally? Any of you have, I know, Elena, you've got some experience in Prague, perhaps. And, Emily, do you have experience?
Okay. So I studied at Vassar College, which is like a liberal arts school that used to be an all-women's college, and they kind of pride themselves on being very inclusive and all the things. Then I studied abroad in Prague, in the Czech Republic, in a filmmaking intensive conservatory situation for like 4 months with people from 60 countries from around the world. There were probably, I don't know, like maybe 150 students, and like 12 of us were women, and 6 of us were women from Vassar. And I was pretty shocked at how bad and overt the sexism was there. Like, way worse than anything I had experienced previously to or after the fact. And that's not a generalization of international filmmaking. That's just one experience that I had. And like, I think it's important to acknowledge that as backwards as the United States can be in so many aspects, like we do have such a rich history of feminism that we have made some progress that has not existed in other parts of the world. So we had literally instructors who said that script supervisors could only be women. And the script supervisor is the person responsible for continuity in a film to make sure that, like, if my cup was here, that it's not now over here, and it's meticulous work. And it's not necessarily the job that people go to film school to like sign up to do, although it's an amazing job, an honorable job, and anybody who's interested should do it. But when he said that, when he said only women can be script supervisors, I said, don't you mean like anyone can be a script supervisor? And he said, no, only women can be script supervisors because if the color of a couch changes, a man will never notice. And what that did, when every person making a film needs a script supervisor and there's only 12 women, that means that the only thing that we got to do was script supervise. And I was the only woman who got to hold the freaking camera because I insisted. And it was like crazy, you know, and like things like that are so real. Like this was 2011. Like this is happening still all over the place. Like we are not beyond like overt sexism that is happening constantly. I was told that I could not act in a part because the character was a virgin, and no one would believe that a Brazilian actress would be a virgin at my age, and that would be like an unrealistic thing that obviously the audience would question. I mean, these are real things that happened, like when I was a student, you know? And so I say this not to be like, woe is me or whatever. No, I say this because I want us to understand that this is going on constantly. Just because we think we're isolated and we've gotten past this does not mean that people around the world are still learning filmmaking this way.
So, like I mentioned before, I ran a film festival in Trinidad and Tobago for 10 years, and we programmed primarily Caribbean cinema, Caribbean diasporic cinema, as well as African, Indian, and Latin American cinema. And I really found actually there to be a lot of diversity in terms of the gender of the directors and a lot of collaboration too. I saw a lot more male-female co-directors oftentimes partners. And the one trend is, and I think this happens in the States too, and in Europe and elsewhere, that a lot of times there'll be a female producer and then a male director. And so that is something that I saw quite a bit, but I think it's kind of phasing out. And I mean, generally our program, and we also, it's important who's curating and who's making these decisions, because we were focused on making sure that our program had balance in terms of the locations and the gender of the filmmakers and the topics. So I feel in the art world, to me, it seems like we're in a time where there's a lot of awareness around that, but that's not the larger sort of mainstream impulse. But I had a positive experience in the Caribbean, even though there is a lot of misogyny and machismo behavior. I did find that there was some balance in the film world.
It's great to hear. I'd like to kind of summarize this by asking each of you to present from your unique perspective, what would be your hopes and dreams for changes with women filmmakers and women cinematographers in the industry for the next 10 years?
Definitely want to see us encourage each other and support each other and help us to really make those films that speak to the human experience and authentic experiences, and not feel like in order to make a really impactful movie that's going to make a big splash, that we have to show flesh or show these stereotypes just because we think people are used to seeing. I feel like we should all take that responsibility on and try to uplift the generation younger than us as well. But I also put the responsibility in the hands of the audience, because the audience chooses what films are being popularized and what's being made more of, So the quality of your content and the richness in which you see female characters, it really kind of depends on what your choices are. So.
I really want to see women and non-binary folks in network executive roles. I feel like I have diverse showrunners, I have diverse crews at this point. It's not the same world that I was working in when I was the only woman for 16 days. Thank goodness that's starting to evolve. But let me tell you, when you get network notes, those are coming from men, still. And that's where the buck stops. Like, that's who's greenlighting projects. Like, that's who's deciding what airtime you get. That's who's deciding what markets this piece is going to resonate with and whether or not you get to be slated for prime time. Like, it is a huge problem that every time I have a Zoom call with network executives, I don't see anyone who's even close to looking like me or coming from a different background than you would expect. It's over and over and over the same. Mom, just got off another network call with a bunch of white guys, like every single time. And it's just, it's getting frustrating because it doesn't matter how diverse your team is to a certain point if the person giving you feedback is the same.
Thank you, Elena.
Well, so Agnes Varda said that she would like less accolades and more money. So I think, to this point, more money. I would like more money. I would like to see more money in the hands of filmmakers who are taking responsibility for the images that they are offering, and just giving our society a chance to grow and to envision a new identity for ourselves through our media culture, which is such a powerful thing.
And Emily, I'd like to ask a follow-up question. Since you are in education, do you see the entrants, the students who are interested in film, to be more diverse than they have been in the past? And how do you see the future for film based on what you're saying, people enrolling in school?
I know our department is very committed to balancing the gender equation, and also for CU Boulder being known as a more sort of white demographic. I find our department is very diverse, so we are about 50-50 male-female student body in the Cinema Studies and Moving Image Arts department, and then also a number of people of color from Colorado, which is great too, but then also from out of state as well. We have a unique history in which the department was founded by experimental filmmakers, and we still teach on analog film, and they also have to learn to edit on Avid, which is the only professional editors use Avid. So there's also a certain type of person who comes to our program. But I'm hopeful. You have to be. I think to be an artist, you just have to be sort of blindly optimistic. And so.
We have 2 minutes left, so I would encourage each of you to give any final comments in the 2 minutes that we've got, and your perspectives on anything at all that we've talked about today.
I would just be careful with how the word diversity is used when describing anything about CU or Boulder. Yeah. Like, even when talking about, women versus men and whatnot. Because in my mind, I hear, it's pretty diverse. I'm like, oh wow, there's a black professor there now, but there's not, so again, it's my lens, and maybe nobody else hears it that way. So again, just being conscious of that. Yes. And yes, we got one. Woo! Yes. All right, cool. Yeah. What was I going to say? I mentor at a creative accelerator, and I also run an internship program at a venue where I teach people how to use camera and whatnot. And I taught at Colorado Media School for a few years, which is a trade school, not a traditional college. People just come right into video production. And what was cool about the trade school was that there were actually there was a lot of diversity in gender and in ethnicity, and it was awesome. But what I saw as far as who ended up getting the jobs and what happened after that, it was mostly, again, white guys. And as much as I try to encourage everybody and all the students, I don't know what the disconnect was. So again, I would just really love to see, I think what we need is just more encouragement from each other and just from the community, and from the stories that you want to hear. So, all right.
Thank you.
I think I've said my piece. I think I've told you all how I really feel. I just encourage, if we have young people in the audience who want to become filmmakers, who do not fit the traditional mold, just please go for it and find your people. We need you so badly. Just go for it and find people who understand that your journey is different because of who you are, and are willing to go the extra mile to help you even when it's inconvenient, and even when you're facing things and realities, and when you're the only person hearing something be said that's offensive or whatever. Make sure that you find the people who are gonna say, you know what, you're right. Let's take a minute and actually talk about this. Because if you don't have someone like that on your team, it's gonna be really lonely. And if we are filmmakers already, let's make sure that we're hiring people on our team who is that type of person, who is gonna take the time to say, you know what, this is messed up, and I think we can fix this if we're just willing to be 30 minutes behind schedule. It's not a big deal. Let's just resolve this situation. You know what I mean? There's always another solution. So don't be scared. It's going to get better. We just have to keep doing it.
I'd like to thank all of you for coming and asking such great questions. Sorry that all the questions didn't get asked. And I'd like to thank Emily and Katrina and Elena for such a great panel.